My husband threw me out of the house after I won $10 million in the lottery. You won't see one single penny of my money, you lazy fat deadbeat, he screamed at me with malice. But the idiot never checked the name on the back of the ticket. A week later, everything changed. Sometimes the person who sleeps next to you can not only break your heart, but also rip out your soul without ever raising their voice. Chantal Holloway was 38 years old and had the face of a woman who had learned to stay silent, not out of cowardice, but out of survival. Her eyes, though tired, still held the spark of someone who hadn't yet resigned herself to being invisible. For 5 years, she had worked as a cleaning aide at the City General Medical Center. Midnight shifts, double duty, and the constant throbbing pain in her feet were her daily companions. Her white uniform was always spotless, despite a salary that barely covered her bus fare. She lived in a run-down, working-class neighborhood. The houses were tightly packed, the brickwork exposed, and tall iron gates protected residents from neighbors who knew too much but never said a word. Chantal shared a roof with her husband, Derek Sinclair, and their 2 children, Jamal, who was 11, and Destiny, who was 7. Both attended the local public elementary school. Derek, on the other hand, spent his days watching television or shut away in the bedroom, smoking and blaming the world for his bad luck. The last time he held a formal job had been almost a year ago. According to him, the bosses were imbeciles and the co-workers were backstabbing traitors. Since then, his temper had soured. Arguments became frequent, yelling, doors slamming, long silences, and veiled threats that, while leaving no physical marks, began to poison everything around them. Chantal had stopped talking to him about her problems. She no longer shared her joys, much less her hopes. Then, one Friday, exhausted after 12 hours scrubbing floors at the hospital, she stopped in front of a corner store. A fluorescent yellow sign announced the week's accumulated jackpot, $10 million. She checked her wallet. She only had $40. She hesitated, but something inside her, perhaps the desperate desire for a different life, made her reach out and buy a ticket. That night, while Derek snored with the television blaring and an empty beer bottle on the nightstand, Chantal placed the ticket there. She looked at it one last time before falling into bed. Then she hugged herself and closed her eyes. She didn't even mention the exact number to Derek, only telling him, "Just so you know, I bought a lottery ticket, just in case." Derek didn't flinch. He waved his hand as if shooing away a fly. The days passed. Chantal stuck to her routine. Work, home, helping the children with homework, and avoiding Derek's bad mood. One afternoon, returning from the hospital, she noticed he was different. It wasn't his expression, it was the silence, a tense, cutting silence, the kind that precedes a storm. Derek was sitting motionless in the dining room, holding the lottery ticket in his hand. The television was broadcasting the news at full volume. The winning number for the Mega Millions had been 984176, and that exact number was perfectly printed on the ticket he held between his fingers. Chantal felt a slight tremor in her knees. She approached, trying to understand. "That's mine," she said softly. Derek didn't respond. He just stared at her with a dry, dark gaze, like that of a complete stranger. She repeated, "I bought that ticket with my last $40. What followed was an explosion of years of pent-up rage. Derek jumped to his feet, threw his chair to the floor, and screamed with a fury that sent Destiny, who was playing in her room, running out in fright. "You? You think that money belongs to you? You won't see one single penny, you fat deadbeat. You should be grateful I put up with you all these years." Chantal froze. She felt the blood drain from her face. Jamal appeared behind her, his eyes wide as saucers. "Dad, why are you yelling at Mom like that?" But Derek didn't stop. "This is my house, my rules. You and your brats aren't going to ruin my life right now." Chantal took a step back, her heart pounding against her chest. She grabbed the back of a chair. "Derek, that ticket has my name on it. I bought it." "There's no name written on it," he roared, waving the paper in the air. "And if there was, I'd rip it off your face. Get out. Get out of my house now." The children started crying. Jamal hugged his sister, trying to cover her ears. Chantal couldn't understand, didn't want to understand. This was her house, her children, her family. But in that instant, she realized she had nothing left. Derek went to the bedroom, opened the closet, and threw her few belongings onto the floor. A cracked suitcase, a pair of worn sneakers, 3 old blouses. He dragged them to the front door. Chantel, her dignity hanging by a thread, stooped to pick them up as neighbors began peering out their windows. "What are you doing, Derek? The kids are watching you!" shouted a neighbor from the second floor. "Mind your own business, busybody," he snarled. "This woman thinks she's going to rob me." Chantel walked out with the suitcase in her hand. Jamal ran after her. "Mom, don't go! Don't leave us!" "I'm not leaving you, baby, never. I just need to think." She walked aimlessly. She passed through streets that seemed darker than ever. The city went on, indifferent. No one stopped to look at a woman with empty eyes and a mended suitcase. She ended up sitting on a park bench. The night chill sank into her bones. She hugged her knees and took a deep breath, trying not to shatter from the inside out. Close to midnight, her cell phone vibrated. It was a text from Jamal. "Mom, I love you. Everything is going to be okay. I promise." Chantel burst into tears. There was no force that could contain what she felt at that moment. Meanwhile, Derek celebrated at the house with a group of friends who barely knew his middle name. He drank as if the money had always belonged to him. He posted a story on social media with the ticket in his hand, oblivious that on the reverse, a small line written in pencil read, "Chantel Holloway, 0817. The ticket remained intact, tucked between the pages of a Bible that Chantel used as a safety deposit box. Derek had found it while looking for something to sell. He never paused to look at the details. He never thought she could claim anything, because in his mind, she wasn't even entitled to her own name. In the park, an older lady in her 60s approached Chantel with a hot coffee. "Are you all right, sweetie?" No, but I will be." "Want to talk about it?" "Not today. Maybe tomorrow." Chantel drank the coffee. It tasted like childhood, like what once was. And in that moment, while the city slept and her world seemed to be collapsing, she realized something inside her had awakened. It wasn't hatred, nor was it revenge. It was dignity. And although that night she slept on a bench with wet shoes and a shattered soul, for the first time in a long time, she dreamed. She dreamed she stood up. She dreamed she returned for her children. She dreamed that this ticket, which seemed to have left her with nothing, would be the start of everything she had always deserved. Dawn didn't bring hope. It brought cold, an aching back, and a metallic taste in her mouth that wasn't hunger. It was stale sadness. Chantel woke up sitting on the park bench, hugging her loneliness, her face damp from the early morning drizzle. The lady who offered her coffee was gone, leaving only a few people sleeping on cardboard and the echo of her own thoughts pounding against her chest. She got up aimlessly. She walked through empty streets, wrapped in a jacket that offered no warmth, dragging a suitcase that grew heavier with every step. She decided to go to her mother's house. She knocked with cold knuckles and waited. She heard the shuffling steps behind the door and finally the sound of the latch turning. Brenda appeared, a dry woman whose gaze had hardened over the years. She didn't say good morning. She examined her daughter from head to toe and crossed her arms. "What happened now?" she asked without surprise. "I need to stay for a few days. Derek threw me out." Brenda sighed as if she had heard this story 1,000 times. "And now you realize who he is? I told you, Chantel. I warned you when you first met him. That man never loved you." "I know. I'm not here for a lecture, just for a roof, Mama. That's all." Brenda hesitated. She looked at her daughter the way you look at an old stone. Finally, she opened the door. Chantel walked in. The air smelled of burnt onion and disappointment. She went straight to the sofa and collapsed. Brenda sat in a chair, crossed her legs, and lit a cigarette. "And the kids?" "He wouldn't let me take them." "And you left without a fight?" Chantel looked at her with empty, weeping eyes. "I didn't have the strength anymore. I felt dead inside." "So what are you going to do now?" "I don't know." Brenda slowly blew out the smoke. "Well, you better figure it out fast. Because you're not staying here forever. The sharp pain in Chantel's stomach was instantaneous. She couldn't find solace even in her own blood. The shelter she sought had a price she wasn't willing to pay. Contempt disguised as help. Sleeping there felt like begging for dignity. She endured 2 nights. On the 3rd, she decided to leave. She used a library computer terminal to search for shelters for survivors of domestic violence. She found one 6 blocks from the hospital. She knocked on the door with fear. A woman in her 40s answered, brown skin, deep eyes, a firm expression. "You must be Chantel." "Yes, they told me you help here. I'm Tracy. Come in." The place was an old house, lovingly adapted. There were posters of solidarity on the walls, photographs of smiling women, a kitchen that smelled of hot soup, children running, and silent, shared tears. Chantel felt like she could finally breathe for the first time in days. Tracy led her to her office. She took out a notepad and began to write. Full name, Chantel Holloway, age 38. Violence, physical, emotional, economic. Chantel hesitated. Emotional and economic. He threw me out of the house in front of my kids. Tracy nodded. Do you have proof? No, just my word, and a lottery ticket that I bought. And he kept. Tracy looked up. Lottery? Yes, I bought a ticket a week ago with my last $40. I left it at the house. It won $10 million and he kept it. He threw me out and insulted me. He said I deserved nothing. Tracy was silent for a few seconds. Then, slowly, she took off her glasses and looked at her with more than just attention. She looked at her with humanity. Do you know what that means? What? That you didn't just suffer emotional abuse, you suffered theft. If that ticket has your name on it, that money is legally yours. Chantel felt an electric current run through her skin. She hadn't considered this possibility. In her head, she had lost everything. But Tracy was talking about laws, paperwork, and justice. What if no one believes me? What if he says he bought it? You said you bought it with your last $40. Do you have proof? I paid cash at a corner store. Tracy looked at her intently. Chantel, I'm going to ask you a difficult question. Do you want justice or do you want revenge? Chantel didn't answer immediately. She took a wrinkled photo out of her pocket. Her children, and Derek at the park. An old photo from the happy times that no longer existed. I want him to look me in the eyes and realize he has nothing. That's what I want. Tracy closed her notepad. That's called emotional justice, and I'm going to help you get it. Meanwhile, in what had been Chantel's house, Derek was toasting with strangers, young women, opportunistic friends, smoke, loud music, champagne bottles, and empty promises. He had hired a photographer to stage a new neighborhood millionaire photo shoot. He posted online with captions like, "Life changes fast, 0 to 100 real quick." His ego floated above everything. He received messages from women who had never spoken to him before. They invited him to dinners, they flattered him. He bought a sports car, even though he didn't know how to drive, and hired a chauffeur. He wore fake watches and borrowed gold chains. He became a viral personality, but the calls started coming. First, they were anonymous, then they became insistent. At first, he thought they were jokes. Then they started leaving messages that made him uneasy. We know that ticket isn't yours. Enjoy it while you can. Money doesn't wash away filth. The truth always comes out. Derek started changing the locks, installing cameras, and growing paranoid. He couldn't sleep. He suspected everyone, even his brother Keith, to whom he had entrusted the administration of part of the money. Keith, who had a serpentine smile, was beginning to move funds without Derek noticing. But Derek didn't know that yet. At the shelter, Chantel spent her nights with other women. They shared worse stories and similar pains. One woman had a scar on her forehead. Another hadn't spoken in weeks. Tracy organized talks, workshops, and safe spaces. Little by little, Chantel began to return to herself. She learned about her rights and legal processes. She found out that if she could prove she bought the ticket, she could claim the entire prize. She then remembered that she had written her name in pencil on the back of the ticket out of habit, a detail that could change everything. Tracy smiled when she told her. That name written down could be the key. Are you ready to fight? Yes. Then we're going to do this right. No drama, no emotions, with intelligence. Chantel wrote a letter to her children. She couldn't see them yet. Derek wouldn't allow it. But she wanted them to know she hadn't abandoned them. Tracy managed to deliver it through a neighborhood ally, a woman who had also suffered violence and now became their silent supporter. Destiny cried when she read it. Jamal put it under his pillow. Chantel also began building her new identity, not just legally, but internally. She was no longer the humiliated wife. She was the woman who chose to rebuild herself from the ashes. She started writing in a notebook, talking to other women, and healing. One night, Tracy walked into the living room and turned on the television. Derek was on the news. The new rich guy, the one who changed his luck, the one who was now a cryptocurrency entrepreneur. Chantel watched in silence. "How does it make you feel to see him like that?" Tracy asked. "Like all of this is a movie, but this time I don't want to be the victim. I want to be the one writing the script." Tracy handed her an envelope. "This is for you. It's the copy of the complaint we're going to file. But before that, there's something else." Chantel looked at her carefully. "What?" "A journalist got interested in your case. She wants to tell your story anonymously as part of a campaign on economic violence. Are you game?" Chantel hesitated. Then she nodded. "Let the world know, because what he did to me, he's done to countless others." That night, Chantel dreamed again, but she didn't dream of standing up. She was already standing. She dreamed she was running, that her children were waiting for her in a new home, and that life, although cruel, could still be fair. On the other side of the city, Derek woke up in a cold sweat after a nightmare where he lost everything in front of a mocking crowd. The game was just beginning, and he didn't even know it. Derek woke up sweating, the sheets clinging to his body, a constant ringing in his ears. He had dreamed he was standing naked in the middle of a square, with the lottery ticket dissolving between his hands. Around him, a crowd laughed, pointing and shouting, "Thief!" He got up abruptly, without looking at the time, and went to the bathroom. The mirror showed a tired face with bags under his eyes, new wrinkles, and a disheveled look that could no longer be hidden behind his haircut or expensive cologne. He splashed cold water on his face and went back to bed. A young woman tattooed up to her neck was sleeping beside him. He couldn't even remember her name. He had met so many in those weeks that he had lost count. Women came and went like the smoke from the cigars he now constantly puffed on. The money had turned him into a caricature of himself. He had cars, flashy watches, a new house and a gated community, though he hadn't finished paying for it yet. He signed contracts without reading them, recommended by men he barely knew, people from the neighborhood who magically appeared with shark smiles and promises to multiply his fortune. He believed them. They called him an entrepreneur, an investor, and he smiled like a child with a new toy. Everyone wanted to be near the new millionaire, though no one truly respected him. His brother Keith was one of the first to show up. He visited as soon as he heard about the prize. He told Derek he was happy for him, that they were blood, and that he had always known Derek was destined for something great. Derek, hungry for validation, believed him without reservation. He gave him control of part of the money, signed power of attorney, and opened overseas accounts in Keith's name. Keith pretended to be a financial expert. In reality, he was an unscrupulous opportunist. While Derek played the celebrity, Keith slowly moved the money, small transfers, fictitious investments, ghost accounts. During one of their supposed advisory sessions, Derek told Keith, "I'm thinking of buying a yacht, or maybe opening a nightclub, something big, so people see I'm not the same guy I was before." Keith looked at him with that enigmatic smile that was part of his disguise. "Sure, brother, whatever you want. But first, let's secure your cash."
You don't want to end up like those guys who win the lottery and are worse off than before in 2 years. Derek laughed carelessly. That's never going to happen to me. Keith just nodded, already counting what would soon be his. Meanwhile, Jamal and Destiny lived trapped between abandonment and resentment. Derek had brought them along to the new apartment, a high-rise with a gym and pool, but he barely paid them any attention. He promised to take them to Disney, but never bought the tickets. He swore they would soon have the best toys and clothes, but he only used them to post photos that showed how well he was doing as a successful single father. One night, Jamal stared at him from the sofa. He was 11, but had the weary eyes of an adult. "Dad, why isn't Mom here if she was the one who bought the ticket?" Derek tensed up. The glass he was holding trembled slightly in his hand. He turned with a smile that wasn't a smile. "Don't repeat that. She's nobody. She left. She didn't want this life. She didn't want to fight for me." "That's not true." "I told you not to repeat that." Destiny started crying silently. Jamal hugged her, and Derek locked himself in his room. He couldn't stand anyone questioning his version of events. He had convinced himself that he had won the money by destiny, that he deserved it, and that Chantel was a burden, an anchor he had finally cut loose. In another corner of the city, Chantel held a piece of paper in her hands. It was the acceptance letter to begin the legal process. Tracy looked at her with contained pride. "Today you take the first step, not toward revenge, but toward the truth." Chantel nodded. She no longer trembled. Her voice was no longer broken. Something in her gaze had changed. She was the same woman, but with a different fire in her eyes. Tracy, in the meantime, had contacted a journalist named Monique, who specialized in women's rights. Monique had also been a survivor of economic violence. She became obsessed with Chantel's case as soon as she heard it. It wasn't just a powerful story. It was an X-ray of thousands of invisible women who were stripped of their dignity without a trace. Monique asked to interview her. Chantel agreed, on the condition that her face and name not be revealed. The documentary began filming at the shelter with testimonials from other women. It was a time bomb, a mirror for society. Monique presented it as stolen money when the violence leaves no bruises. Chantel's story became the common thread. Meanwhile, Derek began to notice that something wasn't right. Calls from unknown numbers, messages with unsettling phrases. One night, he found a handwritten note on his apartment door that simply said, "Thief." It was crude, direct contempt. He stormed into the apartment, checking everywhere, shouting and hitting the table. Jamal watched him from the hallway. "What's wrong, Dad?" "Nothing. Go to bed." But Derek couldn't sleep, not that night or the next. His paranoia grew. He had alarms installed. He asked Keith to investigate if anyone was talking badly about him. Keith told him not to worry, but the next day the main bank account showed strange movements. He called the bank. He didn't understand anything they told him. Money had been transferred to an international account in the name of a company he didn't know. He called Keith. No answer. Chantel, meanwhile, received messages of support from other women who had seen the documentary preview. Women from inner-city neighborhoods, offices, and small towns. They told her they felt represented, that it gave them strength. Chantel began to feel that her story no longer belonged only to her. It was part of something bigger. The lawyer Tracy had contacted confirmed that if they could prove Chantel bought the ticket, Derek could not only lose the money, but also face charges for misappropriation. Everything depended on one piece of evidence, the name written on the reverse. Tracy picked up the phone and called the notary who had verified the ticket when it was claimed. "Do you remember if the ticket had any inscription?" "I didn't check it fully, only the numbers on the front, but if it did, it must be stored in the archive." "I need you to check. It's urgent." The notary hung up. 2 days later, he called back. "Yes, the ticket is scanned on both sides. There's a name in almost erased pencil. It says Chantel Holloway, with a date." Tracy smiled like someone seeing a crack in a concrete wall. Chantel covered her mouth with her hands and cried silently. It was real. She had proof. The most important proof.
Derek, for his part, received a letter that same week, a white envelope with no visible return address. Inside was a judicial notice, a lawsuit for illegal appropriation of property. The document had Chantel's name in large print, the rest blurred before his eyes. He stood still, breathing raggedly. He locked himself in the bathroom and looked in the mirror, the same mirror where, months earlier, he had felt invincible. That face now looked like someone defeated before the battle even began. He dialed Keith's number. It rang twice. Then an automatic recording came on. "The number you have dialed does not exist." He called the financial institution. They informed him that Keith had withdrawn all the money from the secondary account 3 days ago. Derek felt his legs weaken. He leaned on the sink. Then he screamed with a force that shook the walls. Jamal and Destiny were terrified. Destiny ran to her room. Jamal looked at him from the bathroom door. "What's wrong, Dad?" Derek turned. His eyes were bloodshot. Nothing! Everything's fine!" Jamal looked at him for one more second, then said, "Mom didn't yell like that," and she left. Derek didn't sleep that night. The next day, he checked every contract and called everyone. No one answered. The supposed investor was gone. The tattooed woman, Tanisha, was gone too. His parties were over. His friends disappeared. The mocking messages returned. Chantel prepared her statement. The lawyer explained every step. They weren't just seeking to recover the money. They wanted to set a legal precedent. It was a battle that could change many lives. The documentary would be released a week later, right after the initial hearing. The mask of success was beginning to fall. Derek could no longer sustain the lie, and what was coming he couldn't yet imagine. Justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in the form of paper, in the name of a woman who was expelled, humiliated, and who now returned not to beg, but to claim what was always hers, and the first blow was already on its way. Chantel wasn't just returning. She was returning with a truth impossible to erase. The judicial notice had exploded in Derek's hands like a silent bomb. The envelope was white, unadorned, but inside it carried a threat that not all his false power could control. His hands trembled as he read his full name printed in black ink. Derek Sinclair, sued for misappropriation, economic, and emotional violence. At the bottom, the sender wasn't a common law firm. It was the name of a woman he had erased from his life, as if she were just another stain. Chantel Holloway. Derek screamed, throwing the envelope against the wall. He paced back and forth like a caged animal. He called the attorney who had helped him close certain shady contracts when he first started moving undeclared money. But this time, the voice on the other end was dry, distant. "This is a different league, Derek. I don't get involved in cases with violence, much less when there's legal proof." "I'm paying you. Fix this." "Not anymore. I'm sorry, you're on your own." He hung up. Derek threw the phone to the floor where it broke into 3 pieces. Then he looked at his open, empty hands. He felt everything slipping away, that every decision he had made since touching that cursed ticket was pulling him closer to the abyss. On the other side of the city, Chantel held her declaration. It was a simple paper, but every word written there was a wound closing. Tracy accompanied her without speaking, as she usually did when silence was worth more than any speech. Outside, in the courthouse hallway, several journalists awaited the start of a hearing that was already trending on social media. The documentary about Chantel had exploded. It was being shared in women's groups, universities, and alternative media. Thousands commented, cried, and remembered. Some even called her a symbol of resistance. But Chantel didn't want to be a symbol of anything. She just wanted justice and her children. She walked into the room with a firm step. The judge, a man with a neutral expression and thick glasses, looked at her carefully. Derek arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a wrinkled suit and an inflamed face. He brought a new lawyer, young and nervous, hired that same morning with what little was left of his fortune. Derek didn't greet Chantel or anyone else. His gaze was a dark well. The judge called for silence. "We will begin the preliminary hearing for the Holloway versus Sinclair case. All parties are present. Let us commence." Chantel stood up. The judge asked her to speak. She took a breath and, without raising her voice, began. "My name is Chantel Holloway. I am a mother, a woman, and a survivor. For years, I lived next to a man who made me believe I was worthless, that everything I did was insignificant, that my job wasn't real, that my decisions didn't count. When I bought that lottery ticket, I did it dreaming of giving my children a better life. I never imagined it would be the excuse he used to destroy me. I don't want his money. I'm not interested in it. I want my children back. I want him to face justice for everything he silently took from me, because economic violence is also violence. Because many women like me are stripped of everything every day without anyone listening to them." She paused, her gaze fixed on Derek, who wouldn't meet her eyes, only dropping his head uncomfortably. Chantel took a breath and closed with a phrase that disarmed everyone in the room. "I never wanted his money. I only want my children to know that their mother was never a deadbeat, but a strong woman who chose to stand up." The silence was absolute. The judge nodded and turned his attention to Derek. "Mr. Sinclair, you have the floor." Derek stood up. His voice sounded strained. "That's a lie. She's using this to make me look bad. I won that money. She didn't even know how the lottery worked. I was the one who claimed the ticket. I did it legally." "Do you have proof that you purchased it?" No, but neither does she." Chantel's lawyer stood up. "With the court's permission, yes, she does. We will present scanned images of the original ticket archived by the lottery office, where the name Chantel Holloway is clearly written in pencil on the back, with a date prior to the drawing." The judge took the documents, observed them carefully, passed them to his assistant, and then looked at Derek. "Do you wish to respond?" That could be false. She could have written it later. It's a trap." The judge interrupted him. "It was scanned by the official entity before you claimed the prize. The original file confirms it. Mr. Sinclair, you are in a very serious situation. I recommend you choose your words carefully." Derek sat down suddenly. He was pale. For the first time, his speech faltered. He no longer had arguments, only rage. The hearing continued with testimonies. Tracy testified about the conditions under which Chantel arrived at the shelter. Then 2 neighbors spoke. One recounted witnessing the humiliation when he threw her out of the house with insults. The other narrated how Chantel was the one who supported the household for years, while Derek worked on projects that never materialized. But the unexpected came at the end. The judge called a final witness. Her name wasn't on the initial documents. She was proposed by Chantel's defense that very morning. When she walked into the room, Derek stood up as if he had seen a ghost. It was Tanisha, one of his mistresses, the same woman who posted photos with him online, the one he called the real queen of his life. Chantel looked at her with a mixture of surprise and sadness. Tanisha approached the stand. Her appearance was different. She wore no makeup, her dress was simple, her gaze was dull. The judge asked her to speak. "I have known Mr. Sinclair for 5 months. We started a relationship. I didn't know children were involved, much less that he had thrown his wife out of his home. I found out on social media. At first he denied it, but then when he started running out of money, his attitude changed. He became aggressive. One day we argued about a message I received. He shoved me against the wall. It left a bruise. I didn't file a report. I was scared. But when I saw the documentary about Chantel, I knew I had to be here." Derek shot up from his seat. "Lie! That didn't happen!" The judge banged the gavel. "Silence in the court!" Tanisha continued. "I have recorded messages, audio, where he makes fun of her, of his children, where he says that if he could make her disappear, he would. I have handed them over to the prosecutor's office. They are in their hands." The room erupted in murmurs and cross looks. The judge called for order. Derek was pale, trembling. His new lawyer lowered his head, aware that the case was lost. Chantel didn't smile. She didn't feel vindicated, only sad for everything, for the lost time, for the children caught in the middle, for the damage that no one could erase. The hearing ended with a preliminary ruling. The judge recognized Chantel's name on the ticket as sufficient proof to initiate the process of recovering the money and suspended Derek's access to the linked accounts. Furthermore, he granted Chantel temporary custody of the children until the full trial was resolved. Derek could not approach or communicate with her in any way. When Chantel left the courthouse, a small crowd was waiting for her. Ordinary people, women with signs. Some were crying, others applauded. They weren't fans, they were survivors. A woman approached her. "Thank you for not giving up, for speaking out." Chantel touched her hand. "I don't speak for myself, I speak for all of us." That night, as she prepared to sleep in her shelter room, she received a text. It was from Jamal. It just said, "I saw you on TV. I love you, Mom." Chantel pressed the phone to her chest and closed her eyes. She didn't have everything, but she had the most important thing, the beginning of something new, a truth that no one could erase, and this time, silence wouldn't hold her down. The following morning brought a mild breeze, as if the air had decided to treat her with kindness. She woke up before the rest, walked barefoot down the shelter hallway, and stopped in front of the small kitchen mirror. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived weeks ago. She no longer feared her reflection. She no longer looked for flaws or hid from her thoughts. Now, she looked for motivation, reasons, and, most importantly, a plan. The trial was held in a higher court. It was no longer a preliminary hearing. Now, justice had to issue a definitive ruling. Derek arrived in a rented suit with deep bags under his eyes and once again, alone. No one accompanied him. His new lawyer no longer had the same enthusiasm as before. There was no possible defense. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies numerous, and his public image was destroyed. The documentary continued to circulate online, becoming a symbol of struggle. It was shared by women's associations, lawyers, judges, and hundreds of people who had never heard of Chantel but now recognized her on the street. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Chantel sat in the first row with Tracy at her side. She wore a simple white blouse and held a plain folder. She wore no jewelry. She wore no makeup. She didn't need adornments to show who she was. Her presence spoke for her. The judge reviewed every detail. The ticket registered in her name, the scanned proof, Derek's financial movements, Tanisha's testimony, the audios submitted, the public humiliations, the abandonment of his children. Everything was documented. The judge paused before reading the verdict, as if the air also needed to prepare itself. Based on the evidence presented and the testimonies gathered, this court determines that Mr. Derek Sinclair engaged in misappropriation, fraudulent conduct, and economic and emotional violence toward Ms. Chantel Holloway. He is hereby ordered to pay a compensatory fine of $1 million amount. All his bank accounts are frozen, and the immediate seizure of the property located in the Lakes at Willow Creek gated community is decreed. Furthermore, a restraining order is established, prohibiting the defendant from approaching Ms. Holloway or her children within a minimum distance of 300 yards for a period of 5 years. Derek said nothing. He only lowered his head. The sound of the verdict fell like a heavy gavel. He didn't shout, he didn't cry, he didn't protest. He knew everything was over. Deep down, he knew this had begun the day he threw Chantel into the street as if she were trash. That was the beginning of the end. Chantel left the courthouse in silence. A few media outlets were waiting for her. She didn't speak to the cameras, only to a little girl who approached her timidly with a drawing in her hands. The paper showed a woman with a cape surrounded by hearts. Chantel received it with teary eyes. "Thank you," she said. "It's for me?" "Yes. My mom says you're very brave." Chantel knelt and hugged her. She didn't respond with words. She just closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel the moment. The news of the ruling swept through the national media. Within hours, Chantel's story ceased to be just a case of violence and became a social phenomenon. Interview requests and invitations poured in, but Chantel didn't want cameras or sensationalist shows. She wanted something real, something that would last longer than a few seconds of fame. With Tracy's support and part of the money she recovered after the trial, she founded an organization called the Open Doors Foundation, a space for survivors of economic and emotional violence. The goal was to offer shelter, legal guidance, psychological support, and above all, a real network that functioned beyond pretty speeches. She taught the first workshop herself. It was a small room with recycled chairs and cups of warm coffee. Facing her, 8 women listened in silence, all with different stories, all with the same look in their eyes. Chantel sat down and began to speak without notes, without a prepared speech. For a long time I thought I wasn't enough, that if I stayed quiet, he would change, that if I was patient, if I was good, if I sacrificed, everything would work out. I was wrong. Sometimes silence doesn't save you. Sometimes silence kills you. But I learned something important. We are not the scars others left on us. We are the hands that are writing a new story today. And that story starts with the decision not to live in fear. One of the women broke down crying. Another clenched her fists. Chantel understood in that instant that she had found her place. Not as a victim, not as a hero, but as a bridge. Derek, meanwhile, was living in a rented room in the back of a hardware store. He had no car, no friends, no money. Keith had disappeared. He took everything that was left in the accounts and didn't even bother to leave a note. Derek tried to contact him several times, but the number was out of service. His messages were ignored. No one in the family wanted to talk to him. He was alone, and now, without his masks, he faced himself. And he didn't like what he saw. He looked for jobs, but no one hired him. His face was online, linked to scandals. Even the women he used to surround himself with now blocked him. Tanisha had publicly come forward to tell her story. He was called an abuser, a scammer. Insults rained down on him on social media. He lived in fear of going out, fear of being recognized, and even fear of himself. One night, drunk, he recorded a video on his cell phone. "People are judging me. You all don't know what it was like to live with her. I suffered too. I have a right to be happy." But looking at himself on the screen, he didn't recognize himself. Not even he believed his words. He closed his phone and cried for the first time without shouting, just in silence. Jamal and Destiny were already living with Chantel. The reunion was intimate, full of contained emotion. Jamal hugged her for 5 minutes without letting go. Destiny talked non-stop, as if she had kept everything bottled up inside. Chantel listened to them, kissed them, made them hot chocolate, and promised them something she could keep. "We will never live in fear again." With part of the money, she rented a small, cozy house. White walls, plants on the porch, a kitchen that smelled like home. Jamal had a bicycle. Destiny painted her own pictures. They didn't have luxuries, but they had peace. And that was new. Tracy continued to support her through everything. They had become sisters in the cause, the journey, the pain, and the fight. There were projects, expansion plans, and collaborations with other organizations. Chantel was no longer just a viral story. She was a transformed woman. One evening, while sweeping the patio, Jamal approached her. "Mom, do you regret being with Dad?" Chantel stopped. She looked him in the eyes. "No, because out of all that bad came you two, and you and your sister are the best things that ever happened to me." Jamal nodded. "I miss him, but I understand now. I don't want to go back with him." "You don't have to choose. He will always be your father, but you choose what kind of man you want to be." "I want to be like you." Chantel hugged him. She didn't say anything. There were no words for a moment like that. Time began to pass. The foundation grew. The documentary won awards. Chantel was invited to speak at international forums, but she always came back home to the small gestures, to the hugs, to the stories of real women who, like her, one day said, "Enough." And Derek, in the shadows, was still there, watching from afar as the woman he tried to erase built an empire with what he had scorned. Every so often, he saw her face on television, on social media, in the news, and he lowered his head. He no longer screamed. He no longer complained.
He only fell silent. The price of his arrogance wasn't just losing money, it was losing everything: respect, family, dignity. He was left with the echo of a life that no longer belonged to him. And Chantel could finally sleep peacefully, not because the past had disappeared, but because, for the first time, she had faced it and won. The mornings in the new house weren't luxurious, but they had a harmony that hadn't existed before. The smell of toasted bread mixed with Destiny's laughter, who often sang softly while setting the table. Jamal watered the plants in the small garden he had helped plant with his own hands. It was a modest house, with light walls and large windows, but every corner spoke of rebuilding, of love replanted after the disaster. Chantel walked barefoot on the wooden floor, coffee cup in hand, her hair down and her forehead held high. She had bought that house with part of the recovered money, but it wasn't the money that made it valuable. It was everything it had cost her to get there. Every tile installed, every piece of furniture chosen, represented freedom. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, and the world kept turning, but now, for the first time in a long time, it turned without crushing her. The Open Doors Foundation had grown beyond what she imagined. What started as a support network for women now had branches in 3 other cities. They held workshops, legal counseling, and art and self-care sessions. Chantel had managed to gather a team of professionals who worked with passion, not just for a paycheck. Women and men who had personally experienced what it means to be on the other side of social indifference. Tracy became her formal partner. Together, they organized a national event called Voices That Won't Be Silenced. Thousands of women signed up. It was an unprecedented gathering, and the media covered it as an emotional revolution. During the preparations, Chantel paused and observed the magnitude of what they were creating. Behind the stage, surrounded by technicians, lights, and banners with slogans of struggle, Tracy approached her with a sincere smile. "Do you realize what you've done?" Chantel lowered her gaze, almost embarrassed. "I didn't do it alone. But no one did it for you." On the stage, the team adjusted the final details. Chantel took a deep breath. It was the first time she would speak in front of so many people. Not as a victim, but as someone who transformed her pain into fuel. Meanwhile, in a room rented by the week, in the back of a dilapidated building, Derek tried to set up a live stream from his old cell phone. The screen was dirty, the microphone failed, and his voice sounded empty, like an actor repeating lines without conviction. "Hello, friends. I'm here to tell my truth. Many judged me, but no one knows what really happened." He closed his eyes, and when he checked the number of viewers on the stream, he saw the number 0. No one was listening to him. No one was looking for him. The few who still remembered his name did so out of secondhand embarrassment. He had become a social media joke, a symbol of defeated arrogance. Memes even circulated with his face and mocking phrases like, "When your ego won't pay the rent." The same people who once flattered him now laughed at his ruin. Keith still hadn't appeared. He had disappeared with the last of the money in the accounts. The contracts Derek had signed without reading now kept him tied to debts he didn't even understand. He had lost everything, but the most painful part was knowing that no one missed him. Once a month, he wrote messages to Jamal and Destiny. They never replied. Chantel didn't forbid it, but the children no longer wanted contact. When Jamal saw the messages, he just deleted them. Destiny didn't even read them. To them, the father who had rejected them no longer existed. The Voices That Won't Be Silenced event was bigger than they expected. The auditorium filled with more than 3,000 women. Chantel went up to the stage amid applause. She didn't have a written speech. She spoke from the soul. They taught us to stay quiet, to endure, to justify them. They told us violence only counts if there's blood, but the blood isn't always visible. Sometimes you bleed out on the inside, and no one notices. I lived for many years in silence, thinking love was sacrifice, that being broken was normal. that fear was part of being a woman, until I found myself on a park bench with a broken suitcase and my dignity in shreds. And that day, I decided that no one else was going to tell my story for me. That day, I started writing it myself. There was absolute silence. Some cried, others held hands. When she finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. There were shouts of encouragement, names Chantel didn't know, but who embraced her with their gaze. After the event, a publisher contacted her to turn her story into a book. Chantel hesitated, not out of shame, but out of respect. She knew it wasn't just her story, it was the story of many. She accepted, on the condition of including real testimonies from other women. The book was titled, What We Keep Silent for Love. It was an unexpected success. Social media dubbed her the woman who defeated a millionaire's ego. Chantel didn't like the title. She felt it reduced everything to a conflict with Derek, but she understood that for many, her story represented a battle won on behalf of all those who couldn't tell theirs. The book was translated into 3 languages. Excerpts were read in universities. It became a topic of debate. But Chantel kept going to the community center every morning, making coffee, listening to stories, and comforting silences. One evening, while tidying books in the Foundation's library, Jamal walked into the room. He now had the voice of a teenager. The change was noticeable, but he still kept that deep gaze, so similar to his mother's. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy?" Chantel stood still. She thought about everything that had happened, the sleepless nights, the insults, the trial, the women she hugged, her children growing up without fear. She didn't answer. "I'm not happy. I'm at peace, which is better than happiness, because peace is something no one can take away from you." Jamal smiled. He didn't say anything else. He walked over and hugged her tightly. Meanwhile, in his room, Derek watched a fragment of the event online. He had come across it by chance. His hand trembled as he watched Chantel on the stage, illuminated, applauded. On his face, there was no longer rage, only emptiness. He turned off his phone and sat in silence. He remembered the times he told her she was useless, that no one would listen to her, that she was alone. And now he was the one who was alone. Life hadn't taken everything from him as punishment. It took it to show him that a house cannot be built on a foundation of contempt. Chantel, for her part, returned home that night. She made Destiny's favorite dessert. She helped Jamal with a school project. Then she sat on the porch with a blanket over her legs and a cup of tea. The moon was full, the wind was soft, and for the first time in many years, she felt no fear, no anxiety, and no guilt. Only gratitude, because in the end, when life rips everything away from you, it also gives you the opportunity to rebuild from the truth. And that truth, even if it hurts, always ends up freeing you. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.